Evelyn Thompson thought she knew her husband, Richard, better than anyone after all. They had been married for 30 years, but when a forgotten phone revealed a message from a woman named Leela celebrating their 10-year anniversary, Evelyn uncovered a chilling truth. Richard had been living a secret double life with another woman, a second home and stolen funds, all while sharing her bed. What began as suspicion turned into a criminal investigation that would tear two families apart and expose a betrayal no one saw coming. Evelyn Thompson had always believed she was one of the lucky ones. She met Richard in college, and from the start, everything felt easy. He was kind, dependable, and the sort of man who remembered birthdays without reminders. They married after graduation and settled into a modest home in the quiet town of Maple Glen. Over the years, they raised two children, built a comfortable life, and became pillars of their community. Friends often commented on how in sync they seemed, how solid and reliable their marriage looked from the outside. Evelyn never questioned it. There was never a reason to. Richard worked as a regional manager at a local bank chain. He was respected in his field, known for his attention to detail and calm demeanor. Evelyn managed a small charity organization that helped low-income families with basic needs. Her work gave her purpose, and Richard always encouraged her involvement. Their days followed a rhythm that rarely changed. Breakfast together in the kitchen, a kiss goodbye. Dinner by 7. On weekends, they took walks in the park or visited their grandkids. Life was predictable, safe, and to Evelyn, that was a gift. But then, subtle changes began to creep in. Richard started staying late at work more often. At first, it made sense he was up for a promotion, and Evelyn figured he was trying to impress the higher-ups. But even after the promotion came and went, the late nights continued. He began taking more work trips to places that sounded vaguely familiar but not specific. Cities a few hours away, weekend conferences he never used to attend. He stopped volunteering at community events and missed their Tuesday night card games with friends. Evelyn noticed, of course, but brushed it off. After 30 years, she figured people changed. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe the weight of responsibility was heavier than he let on. Still, she missed the old Richard, the man who brought her coffee just the way she liked it, the one who would randomly show up at her office with flowers or leave notes on the fridge. He wasn't cruel or distant, just different, distracted. Sometimes she caught him staring into space at the dinner table or checking his phone during movies. Evelyn told herself this was just part of growing older together. That may be after so many years, the sparks dimmed, but the foundation stayed solid. She trusted him completely, even when she once noticed a strange charge on their credit card bill, a boutique hotel in a city. Richard had never mentioned she assumed it was a mistake. He'd waved it off, saying it was booked for a client. She hadn't asked further. Evelyn never saw herself as the suspicious type. Richard had given her no reason to doubt him in all the years they'd been together. Their love had weathered the stress of parenthood, job losses, and health scares. Surely it could weather this quiet unease. But beneath that calm surface, something dark was brewing, something Evelyn wasn't prepared for. What she didn't know was that her entire marriage was about to be rewritten, and the man she thought she knew best had been living a double life all along. It started with a forgotten phone. On an ordinary Thursday morning, Richard rushed out the door, late for yet another meeting. The kitchen was quiet, the coffee still warm in Evelyn's cup. When a faint buzz interrupted her thoughts, she turned toward the sound and saw it, an unfamiliar phone lying on the counter next to the toaster. At first, she thought it might belong to one of the grandchildren left behind during a recent visit. But as she picked it up, a wave of unease crept in. The phone was locked, but the screen lit up with a notification. "Happy anniversary, my love. 10 years today." Can't wait to see you tonight. Leela Evelyn froze. Her hands trembled as she stared at the message. 10 years? Anniversary? The words made no sense. Her anniversary with Richard was in August. This was March. She tried to unlock the phone, and to her shock, the password was their wedding date. The same code Richard used for everything. The screen opened instantly. Inside was a different world. Message threads filled with affection, pet names, and plans for secret getaways. Photos of a woman she'd never seen, mid-30s, stylish, often posing in cozy cafes or on sunny rooftops, always smiling. Leela. She was younger than Evelyn by at least 2 decades. There were pictures of Richard smiling beside her, holding her hand, standing in front of places Evelyn had never been told about. Evelyn felt her knees weaken as she sank into the nearest chair. The texts went back as some casual, some intimate, all pointing to the same horrifying truth. Richard had been in a long-term relationship with another woman, not a fling, not a one-night lapse in judgment. This was something else, something structured, sustained, and deeply hidden. Her first instinct was to confront him, to demand answers, to scream, cry, anything to make sense of what she was seeing. But something held her back. Maybe it was shock, maybe disbelief, maybe the years of trust that had conditioned her to always give him the benefit of the doubt. Instead, she began screenshotting everything, saving photos, noting names, phone numbers, addresses mentioned in the chats. With her hands shaking and her breath shallow, she documented every trace of the life Richard had carefully built behind her back. Evelyn knew she couldn't handle this alone. She needed answers, real answers, not from Richard but from facts. Cold, clear truths. That evening, she told Richard that she wasn't feeling well and went to bed early. She watched him kiss her on the forehead, tuck her in like nothing was wrong, then quietly leave the house. An hour later, with his briefcase, she lay still in the dark, eyes open, wondering how many nights like this she had spent alone while he was with someone else. The next morning, while Richard was gone, Evelyn made a decision that would change everything. She opened her laptop and searched for a private investigator. If her marriage had become a lie, she was going to uncover every piece of the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The private investigator she hired was discreet and professional. Within days, he provided Evelyn with a report that shattered any lingering hope she had, that this might be some kind of misunderstanding. Richard hadn't just been unfaithful, he had been living a fully constructed second life under the name Mark Raymond. Richard maintained an apartment in the nearby city of Brooksville, just 2 hours away. It was a modern one-bedroom space tucked inside a high-rise building. Surveillance. Photos showed him coming and going regularly, sometimes staying overnight, sometimes for entire weekends. In that apartment, he kept clothing, personal belongings, and he even framed photos of himself and Leela. Leela, the woman from the messages, wasn't just a casual affair. She owned a boutique downtown, and according to the investigator she introduced Richard to her friends and co-workers as her long-term partner. He had met her parents, he had vacationed with her, he had even attended family functions. Evelyn couldn't believe it. For over a decade, her husband had essentially been someone else, an entirely new man in a different city. He managed to balance both lives with disturbing precision, slipping between identities like changing clothes. The investigator also discovered something even more disturbing. Richard had created multiple bank accounts under his alias. The names were fake, the documentation forged, but the money was real, and some of it came from joint accounts he shared with Evelyn. Small amounts at first unnoticeable. Later, larger sums cleverly hidden behind business expenses or charity donations. He had used the money to support his life, with Leela paying rent, buying gifts, covering vacations. Evelyn was stunned. Her own charity's funds had been siphoned off, used for things as trivial as dinner dates and luxury handbags. The betrayal extended far beyond infidelity. This was theft, deception, and possibly criminal fraud. Her trust had not only been broken, it had been exploited. She tried to trace back in her memory to see the signs she had missed. The extra phone calls he took in the garage, the sudden interest in skincare and new cologne, the work trips that didn't align with any known conferences. Every little inconsistency she had ignored now screamed for attention. She realized that her life had been carefully manipulated, every question deflected with charm, every suspicion softened by familiarity. What made it worse was that no one had ever suspected him. Not their children, not their friends, not even Evelyn's closest confidants. Richard had built his second life in secret, keeping both worlds perfectly separate. His deception was meticulous, almost professional. There was no accidental discovery only, a rare moment of carelessness that had finally exposed him, with evidence in hand. Evelyn faced a difficult decision. She could confront him, demand explanations, tear apart their home with fury. Or she could take a step back and prepare for something bigger, something that would hold him accountable not just as a husband, but as a criminal. For the first time in 30 years, she realized that the man she had married might not just be unfaithful. He might be dangerous. Evelyn took her findings to the authorities. At first, she wasn't sure they would take her seriously. After all, she was a wife reporting her husband for embezzlement and identity fraud. But once she presented the documentation from the private investigator, the fake IDs, the bank account records, the charity fund discrepancies, the picture became clear. This wasn't just a domestic betrayal. It was a financial crime that reached into multiple areas of their life, including a registered, non-profit organization. What began as a marital crisis was quickly turning into a federal case. Investigators opened a formal inquiry, and the more they looked, the deeper the deception ran. Richard had been diverting funds from their joint savings, Evelyn's charity, and even small community donations meant for housing aid. Some of the money had been laundered through shell companies, fake businesses set up on paper, but with no real operations. He had used these companies to shuffle money between accounts, masking where it came from and where it went. And it all led back to him, or rather, to Mark Raymond, the false identity he had created to live out his second life. When investigators contacted Leela, she was blindsided. She had no idea Richard was married, let alone for 30 years. She had believed everything. He told her that he was a reserved businessman who didn't like talking about his past, that he had been burned by an earlier marriage and had no children. Leela was devastated to learn the truth, but she was also cooperative. She handed over messages, receipts, and photos, proof of a relationship with Richard and confirmation of how long it had been going on. Then she revealed something Evelyn hadn't expected. She was pregnant. Leela was in her second trimester, and Richard had told her they would get married after the baby was born. He had even picked out names. According to Leela, he had recently suggested selling his vacation property and settling down permanently. That vacation property was actually the home he shared with Evelyn. The man was planning to disappear from one life and fully enter the other. He had been preparing to abandon his wife of 30 years, his grown children, and his entire history without a word. The authorities moved quickly. They obtained warrants to search both the Maple Glen home and the Brooksville apartment. Inside the apartment, they found more damning evidence: passports under a false name, detailed financial records, and a notebook outlining steps for a clean exit. Richard had listed out plans for liquidating assets, transferring funds, and leaving his current life behind within the next 6 months. It was all methodical, emotionless. Like a business transaction, Evelyn sat in silence as officers combed through her home. Her memories were being turned into evidence. Her wedding photos reduced to footnotes in an investigation. She felt like a stranger in her own life, but she also felt something else: resolve. The man who had once shared her dreams was now being exposed, piece by piece, by the truth he thought he had buried forever. Richard was arrested at his office on a Monday morning, just as the bank was opening its doors. No one expected it. One moment, he was greeting employees with his usual calm smile. The next, he was in handcuffs, escorted past stunned co-workers by federal agents. News of his arrest spread quickly, first through whispers in town, then through headlines in the local paper. To the outside world, it was unthinkable. Richard Thompson, family man, banker, community volunteer, was now facing a long list of charges: wire, fraud, identity theft, embezzlement, and forgery. In the days that followed, Evelyn watched her life unravel even further. Reporters camped outside her home. Friends she had known for years avoided her at the grocery store. Her charity was placed under audit, and though she had done nothing wrong, her reputation was tangled in the scandal. She spent hours with attorneys and investigators, going over financial statements, clearing her name from documents Richard had forged. Her bank accounts were frozen temporarily. Her emails were subpoenaed. Every corner of her life was under scrutiny. The trial began 3 months later. Richard's attorney attempted to argue that his actions were the result of mental strain, a man breaking under pressure after decades of responsibility. But the evidence was overwhelming. His elaborate double life had been carefully constructed, not the result of emotional instability, but of calculated deceit. Prosecutors laid out a timeline of manipulation, financial theft, and false identities. They displayed photos of Richard with Leela, records of stolen funds, even the notebook where he had mapped out his plan to disappear. Evelyn sat in the courtroom every day, silent, never once looking at her husband. She had spent years loving him, trusting him, building a life beside him. Now she was watching him become a stranger, one lie at a time. Leela testified to, her voice steady but distant. She spoke not only of betrayal, but of fear. She had believed she was building a future with someone who had never truly existed. The verdict was swift. Richard was found guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison with no chance of early parole. The judge called his actions a cruel dismantling of 2 lives for the sake of personal gratification. Richard showed no emotion as the sentence was read. He only nodded as if he had known this was coming all along. After the trial, Evelyn faced the slow process of rebuilding. She stepped down from her charity temporarily and worked with legal counsel to regain financial stability. She sold the house in Maple Glen, unable to walk its halls without feeling the weight of deception. Her children stood by her, but even they struggled to process the truth. The man they had called father was now someone they barely recognized. Leela moved away, choosing to raise her child in a new city far from the scandal. She never spoke to Richard again. Evelyn began a new life in a smaller town, quietly. Without attention, the betrayal had scarred her, but it hadn't destroyed her. She learned, painfully, that sometimes the people we think we know best are the ones hiding the darkest secrets, and that even after 30 years, a marriage built on lies can crumble in an instant, leaving behind nothing but the truth and the silence that follows.